You know what's crazy? How one comment at a friend's get-together can completely flip your entire life upside down. I'm Lucy, I'm 28, and I need to tell you about the day my husband Francis decided to take me literally when I said we weren't really married. Spoiler alert, turns out he was listening way more carefully than I thought. Look, I need to be real with you about something. Francis and I had been married for 3 years, and I was suffocating, not in some dramatic romantic movie way, just genuinely drowning in his constant need for validation and togetherness. The man used to be this total player before we got married, sleeping around, breaking hearts left and right. Then he met me, and suddenly wanted to be this perfect husband, like he was overcompensating for all his past mistakes. It was exhausting. Every morning he'd ask what my plans were for the day. Every evening he'd want to know how work went, who I talked to, what I had for lunch. When I made weekend plans with my friends, he'd get this hurt look in his eyes like I was abandoning him. God forbid I stayed out past 10 without texting him updates. He'd be sitting there when I got home with this wounded puppy expression, asking if I had fun, if there were any guys there, if I needed anything. I started testing boundaries because I needed to breathe. I'd make dinner plans without mentioning them until I was walking out the door. I'd go shopping for hours without my phone. I'd book girls' trips and tell him about them the day before I left. Each time, he'd get this look on his face like I'd slapped him, but he never said anything directly. Just made these little comments about how marriage was supposed to be a partnership. How he liked knowing I was safe, how he missed spending time together. The worst part? He was always so damn understanding about it. I know you need your space, babe. I just worry sometimes. Or, I'm probably being too clingy, it's just because I love you so much. It made me feel like the bad guy for wanting basic independence, which only made me angrier. Between us, I started resenting everything about him. The way he'd coordinate his outfits to match mine, how he'd suggest we carpool to parties like we were joined at the hip, the way he'd light up when I walked in a room, like I was some kind of prize he'd won. I'd catch myself rolling my eyes when he'd text me sweet messages during the day, or when he'd surprise me with my favorite coffee on his way home from work. I knew I was being harsh, but I couldn't help myself. This wasn't the man I'd married. The Francis I fell for was confident, independent, a little dangerous. This version was clingy and insecure, constantly seeking reassurance that I still loved him, that I wasn't going anywhere. It was like living with a golden retriever who'd been abandoned once and now couldn't bear to let me out of his sight. The breaking point came on a Saturday when Sarah invited us to her house for one of those casual afternoon things. You know the type. Burgers on the grill, beer in coolers, everyone standing around in the backyard pretending to be more relaxed than they actually are. Francis immediately suggested we ride together, wear matching colors, maybe bring a side dish as a couple. I wanted to scream. I can drive myself, I told him, grabbing my keys, and I'm wearing whatever I want. That hurt look flashed across his face again. Okay, sure. I just thought it might be fun to go together. We don't have to do everything together, Francis. He nodded like he understood, but I could see him processing this as another rejection, another sign that his wife didn't actually want to be around him. Part of me felt bad, but a bigger part of me felt vindicated. Maybe if he got the message enough times, he'd back off and give me some breathing room. At Sarah's house, I made a point of mingling without him. I talked to Raul about his new job, laughed at Erica's stories about her dating disasters, even flirted a little with some guy I didn't know who was visiting from out of town. Nothing serious, just enjoying the attention of someone who wasn't monitoring my every mood and reaction. Francis stayed near the grill with the other guys, nursing his beer and occasionally glancing over at me with that same wounded expression. I could practically hear his thoughts. Why doesn't she want to stand with me? Why is she talking to that guy? Did I do something wrong? The thing is, I'd been planning this weekend trip with my girlfriends for weeks. Vegas, 3 days, just us girls, blowing off steam. I'd booked it, requested time off work, bought new outfits, the whole thing. But I hadn't mentioned it to Francis yet, because I knew he'd have opinions. Questions about where we were staying, who was going, what we planned to do. He'd want to drive me to the airport, pick me up when I got back, probably text me the entire time I was gone. So when Erica asked about it in front of everyone, I just said, yeah, I'm so excited. Leaving Friday morning, back Monday night. That's when Francis spoke up from across the yard. Wait, what? You're going somewhere this weekend? The way he said it, not angry, just confused and a little hurt, made something snap inside me. Here we were, surrounded by our friends, and he was going to make me look like some wife who needed permission to take a trip. Like I owed him a detailed itinerary of my life. I'm going to Vegas with the girls, I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Just a fun weekend away. Oh. Francis set down his beer, looking genuinely confused. I didn't know you were planning a trip. Were you going to tell me about it? And that's when I lost it. The way he said it, so reasonable and hurt, like I was some terrible wife for not consulting him about my own plans. Like I needed his approval to live my life. Stop acting like we're married. The words came out sharper than I intended, cutting through all the backyard conversations like a knife. You don't get a say in where I go or who I'm with. The entire party went dead silent. Raul stopped mid-sentence. Sarah froze with a burger halfway to her mouth. Even the neighbor's dog stopped barking. Every single person in that backyard was staring at us, and I could feel my face burning with embarrassment and anger. But you know what? I wasn't sorry. I was tired of tiptoeing around Francis's feelings, tired of being made to feel guilty for wanting independence. If everyone wanted to judge me for refusing to be controlled by my own husband, that was their problem. The silence stretched on forever. Then someone, I think it was Raoul, let out a little snort of laughter. Then another person chuckled. Soon half the party was trying to hide their grins behind their drinks, clearly entertained by the drama of watching a man get publicly dressed down by his own wife. I felt vindicated. Finally, people could see what I was dealing with. Francis standing there looking shocked and hurt, like he couldn't believe his wife would dare speak to him that way in public. The poor, confused husband who just wanted to know where his wife was going. Please. But then Francis did something I wasn't expecting. Instead of getting angry or embarrassed, instead of apologizing like he usually did when I snapped at him, he smiled. Not a hurt smile or a fake smile, but this calm, almost amused expression that I'd never seen before. You're absolutely right, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent yard. We're not married. The laughter stopped immediately. Every person froze, including me. What the hell did that mean? Francis turned to Sarah, raising his beer in this casual toast. Thanks for the great party. I'll be heading out now. Then he looked back at me with that same weird, calm smile. Enjoy your weekend away. Take all the time you need to think. He walked to his car like nothing had happened, got in, and drove away. Just like that. No argument, no scene, no begging me to apologize. He just left. I stood there in Sarah's backyard, suddenly feeling like I was the one who'd been blindsided. Around me, people were starting to whisper, shooting me looks that weren't sympathetic anymore. They looked confused, maybe even a little impressed by Francis's reaction. That was unexpected, Erica said quietly. Sarah was staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Lucy, what just happened? I didn't know how to answer that. I'd gotten exactly what I wanted. Francis backing off, giving me space, stopping with the clingy husband routine. So why did I feel like something had gone terribly wrong? I spent the rest of the party trying to act normal, but everyone kept giving me these weird looks. The guy I'd been flirting with earlier suddenly seemed less interested in talking to me. People's conversations would stop when I approached, then start up again when I walked away. By the time I got home that night, my phone had been buzzing non-stop. Texts from Francis that I ignored, assuming they were the usual apologies and explanations. Messages from friends asking if I was okay, if Francis was okay, what that whole thing at the party was about. I turned my phone off and went to bed, telling myself I'd deal with it all tomorrow. Francis would calm down, probably apologize for making a scene, and we'd go back to normal. Maybe he'd finally understand that I needed space, that his constant hovering was suffocating me. I was wrong about everything. Vegas was amazing. 3 days of freedom, no one asking where I was going or when I'd be back. No guilt trips about not texting enough or staying out too late. Just me and my girls, living our lives without having to answer to anyone. I ignored Francis's calls and texts the entire time. Whatever he wanted to say, whatever apology or explanation he had prepared, could wait until I got back. I was done being made to feel guilty for wanting basic independence in my own marriage. The flight home Monday night was relaxing. I felt recharged, vindicated, ready to have a real conversation with Francis about boundaries and expectations. Maybe his little dramatic exit from the party had been good for both of us. Maybe he'd finally understand that marriage didn't mean ownership. I pulled into our driveway around 9 p.m., already planning what I'd say to him. Something about how the weekend away had given me perspective, how we needed to work on giving each other space, how his reaction at the party had been childish but maybe necessary. My key didn't work. I stood there on our front porch, jabbing the key. Maybe I was just tired and doing it wrong, but no matter how I turned it, twisted it, the lock wouldn't budge. It was like the key belonged to a completely different house. That's when I noticed the boxes. Our entire front lawn was covered with cardboard boxes, all neatly arranged under a blue tarp. My boxes, my clothes, my books, my makeup, my shoes, everything I owned packed up like some kind of organized yard sale. What the hell? I said out loud, staring at the surreal scene. The front door opened and Francis appeared. He looked different, calmer, more put together than I'd seen him in months. He was holding a beer and wearing this expression I couldn't read. "Your stuff is all there," he said conversationally, like we were discussing the weather. I made sure everything was packed carefully, nothing's damaged. I stared at him, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. "Francis, what is this? Why is my stuff on the lawn?" "Your stuff is where it belongs," he said. "On the lawn of someone who wants to be single." "What are you talking about? Why doesn't my key work? Why would your key work? You don't live here anymore." The casual way he said it, like he was explaining something obvious to a confused child, made my stomach drop. This wasn't Francis throwing a tantrum or making a dramatic gesture. This was something else entirely. "You can't just kick me out," I said, my voice starting to shake. "This is my house too." "Actually," Francis said, taking a sip of his beer, "this house belongs to someone who believes in marriage. You made it very clear you're not that person." Before I could respond, our neighbor Lydia appeared from across the street. She had this sympathetic expression on her face, like she was approaching a lost dog. "Excuse me, dear," she called out. "Are you looking for your husband?" "Yes," I said, gesturing wildly at Francis. "He's lost his mind and locked me out of my own house." Lydia smiled with the kind of patient expression reserved for explaining obvious things to confused people. "Oh honey, your ex-husband told me you wanted to be single. He said you made that very clear to everyone at the party Saturday." Ex-husband, the word hit me like a physical blow. I spun back toward Francis, who was watching this exchange with that same unnervingly calm expression. "Ex-husband? We're not getting divorced. This is ridiculous." Francis reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded document. "Process server came by this afternoon. Left this for you." My hands were shaking as I unfolded the papers. Divorce petition, filed by Francis against Lucy, irreconcilable differences. I scanned the first page, then the second, my heart pounding as the reality of what I was seeing sank in. "You filed for divorce without even talking to me about it?" "I did talk to you," Francis said. "You told me to stop acting like we're married because I don't get a say in your life. I took your advice." "That's not what I meant." "That's exactly what you meant. And you said it in front of 15 witnesses. I looked around desperately, hoping someone would back me up, tell Francis he was being crazy and overreacting. But Lydia was still standing there with her arms crossed, watching the drama unfold like it was her favorite TV show. 2 other neighbors had appeared on their porches, clearly enjoying the free entertainment. "You can't do this," I said, my voice cracking. "This is insane. I was just upset about something stupid. People say things they don't mean when they're angry." Francis finished his beer and set the empty bottle on the porch railing. "You weren't angry Saturday. You were making a point, a very clear, very public point about what you think of our marriage. But I love you." The words hung in the air between us, sounding hollow even to me. 3 days ago they might have meant something. 3 days ago, Francis might have been desperate enough to believe them. Now, they just sounded like exactly what they were. A last-ditch attempt to avoid consequences. Francis laughed, and the sound was colder than I'd ever heard from him. You love having someone around to blame for your problems. You love having someone to treat like a roommate who occasionally gets out of line. That's not the same thing. I tried stepping closer, letting tears form in my eyes. Please, can we just go inside and talk about this? Like adults? Adults don't humiliate their spouses in public, Francis said. Adults don't announce to a crowd that their marriage doesn't matter. Adults don't spend 3 days ignoring their husband's calls and texts after making a scene. I needed space to think. Well, congratulations, you've got all the space you ever wanted. I stood there in the driveway, looking back and forth between Francis and my belongings, scattered across the lawn. The confident woman who had declared our marriage meaningless in front of our friends was gone, replaced by someone who was finally beginning to understand that actions have consequences. Where am I supposed to go? I asked quietly. Francis shrugged. Same place you were planning to go when you told everyone we weren't married. Same place you were planning to go when you decided you didn't need to consider my opinion about anything. Lydia cleared her throat from across the street. Dear, there's a nice extended stay hotel about 10 minutes down the highway. Very reasonable rates for people in transition. The look I gave her must have been pure poison, because she actually took a step back. Even the neighbors had turned against me. This isn't over, I said, pulling out my phone. I'm calling my lawyer. Good idea, Francis replied. Tell them to contact Miller and Associates. They'll handle all the details. As I scrolled through my contacts with shaking fingers, Francis walked back toward the front door. Behind me, I could hear him starting to make phone calls, probably to friends who'd witnessed Saturday's performance, and would have trouble explaining why they should be sympathetic now. I paused at the door and looked back one more time. I was standing in the middle of my belongings, phone pressed to my ear, looking exactly like what I'd claimed I wanted to be. Single. The next 3 weeks were a nightmare I hadn't seen coming. My lawyer, when I finally found one willing to take my case, took one look at the divorce papers and gave me the worst news possible. He's documented everything, she said, spreading Francis's evidence across her desk like she was laying out a losing poker hand. Months of text messages where you dismiss marriage as meaningless. Screenshots of social media posts where you complain about being tied down. And 15 witnesses to your public declaration that you're not really married. That was just one argument, I protested. People say things they don't mean when they're upset. Mrs. Chen, your husband's attorney has built a case that shows a clear pattern of you rejecting marital obligations and repeatedly stating that you don't consider yourself bound by marriage vows. In legal terms, this is called an admission against interest. I stared at the evidence of my own words, seeing them in a new light. Text messages I'd sent during fights, Facebook posts I'd made after girls' nights out, casual comments I'd made to friends, all of it painting a picture of someone who viewed marriage as an inconvenience rather than a commitment. What about spousal support? I asked desperately. I gave up 3 years of my life for this marriage. My lawyer shook her head. You repeatedly stated that marriage was just a piece of paper. The court isn't likely to award spousal support to someone who has consistently argued that marriage has no real meaning or value. The divorce proceedings moved faster than I'd thought possible. Turns out when you spend months creating a paper trail of how little you value your marriage, there isn't much left to argue about in court. Francis's attorney presented my own words back to me like evidence in a criminal trial. Every dismissive text, every eye roll caught on someone's phone camera, every public comment about feeling suffocated by marriage, it all came back to haunt me. The worst part was watching Francis in court. He sat there looking calm and reasonable, like the rational party in an irrational situation. When his lawyer asked him to describe our relationship, he spoke about trying to be a good husband, wanting to spend time together, asking basic questions about my plans and whereabouts. I thought marriage meant being partners, he said quietly. But my wife made it clear she viewed my interest in her life as controlling behavior. She repeatedly told me that marriage was just a piece of paper and that she valued her independence more than our commitment to each other. When it was my turn to speak, everything I said sounded defensive and petty. I tried to explain that I'd just been feeling suffocated, that Francis had been too clingy, that I'd needed space to breathe. But next to his calm, documented account of events, I sounded like exactly what I was, someone who'd taken a good man's love for granted and then blamed him when he stopped offering it. The judge barely deliberated. "Mrs. Chen, you've repeatedly stated both privately and publicly that you don't consider marriage to be a meaningful commitment. This court sees no reason to treat your brief union as anything more significant than you yourself have claimed it to be. No spousal support. No claim to the house Francis had owned before we married. No shared assets beyond what I'd brought into the marriage myself. I walked out of that courthouse with exactly what I'd claimed to want: complete independence. It felt nothing like I'd thought it would. Moving into the extended stay hotel Lydia had recommended was humiliating enough, but the real punishment came from our social circle. I'd expected people to be sympathetic, to understand that Francis had overreacted to one argument. Instead, I found myself completely frozen out. Sarah stopped returning my calls. Erica made excuses every time I suggested getting together. Even casual acquaintances seemed to have heard the story and formed their opinions about who was in the wrong. The few conversations I managed to have were devastating. "Lucy, we all saw what happened," Sarah finally told me when I cornered her at the grocery store. "You publicly humiliated your husband for asking a reasonable question, then spent 3 days ignoring him. What did you expect him to do?" "I expected him to act like an adult and talk to me about it." "He tried talking to you for months. We all watched him try. You shut him down, every time." I wanted to argue, to explain my side, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized she was right. Francis had tried to talk to me about feeling disconnected, about wanting to spend more time together, about his concerns that I was pulling away. I dismissed every attempt as neediness or insecurity. The worst part was discovering that I'd become some kind of cautionary tale. Women in our social circle were using my story as an example of how not to treat a good man. I overheard conversations at coffee shops, at the gym, at work. Women talking about how refreshing it was to see a man who knew his worth, who wouldn't tolerate disrespect, even from his own wife. "Did you hear about Lucy and Francis?" I heard one woman say at the office break room. "She treated him like garbage for months, then got shocked when he actually left her." I mean, good for him, right? About time a man stood up for himself. I'd become the villain in my own story. And the worst part was that I was starting to see why. My dating life was non-existent. Word had spread about how I'd treated my husband, and apparently, that was a red flag for most decent men. The few dates I managed to get were disasters, either guys who'd heard the story and wanted to lecture me about respect, or losers who thought my reputation meant I was desperate enough to settle for anything. Meanwhile, Francis seemed to be thriving. I'd see him around town looking healthier, more confident, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He'd lost the hurt, anxious expression that had become his default around me. Instead, he looked like the man I'd originally fallen for, self-assured and content. 4 months after our divorce was finalized, I was sitting in a downtown coffee shop when I saw them together. Francis and Amanda, a woman from our former social circle, who I'd never paid much attention to. They were at a corner table, holding hands and laughing about something on his phone. I watched them for a full 10 minutes, studying their interaction. Amanda looked at Francis the way I never had, with genuine affection and respect. She listened when he talked, smiled at his jokes, touched his arm when she made a point. It was clear she actually enjoyed his company, valued his opinions, wanted to be there with him. Francis looked completely relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. He was animated, confident, clearly comfortable in his own skin. This was the man I'd married, before I'd spent 3 years grinding down his self-esteem with constant rejection and dismissal. They looked happy. Actually, genuinely happy in a way that Francis and I never had been, even in our best moments. I felt something twist in my chest, watching them. Not jealousy exactly, but a sick recognition of what I'd thrown away. Francis wasn't some clingy, insecure man who needed too much attention. He was someone who wanted to be in a real partnership, who valued connection and communication and shared experiences. All the things I'd found suffocating were exactly what Amanda seemed to treasure about him. I stood up to leave, but Francis spotted me across the coffee shop. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something in his expression that hit me harder than anger or hurt would have. Indifference. He looked at me the way you'd look at a stranger, with mild recognition but no emotional investment. Then he turned back to Amanda, dismissing me completely. I was nothing to him now. Less than nothing. I was just someone he used to know, someone who'd taught him what he didn't want in a relationship. Walking back to my car, I finally understood what I'd lost. Not just Francis, but the chance to be loved by someone who'd actually tried to love me. I'd had a man who wanted to build a life with me, who valued my presence in his world, who thought I was worth fighting for, and I'd thrown it all away because I was too selfish and immature to appreciate what I had. The really sick part? Even now, even seeing how much better off Francis was without me, I couldn't bring myself to admit I'd been completely wrong. Part of me still believed he'd been too sensitive, too needy, too quick to give up on us. But sitting in my car outside that coffee shop, watching through the window as Francis and Amanda shared what looked like the kind of easy, comfortable intimacy I'd never allowed us to have, I finally had to face the truth. I'd gotten exactly what I'd asked for. I was single, independent, free to do whatever I wanted without answering to anyone. And I was miserable. The independence I'd craved felt empty and meaningless. The space I'd demanded felt like isolation. The freedom I'd fought for felt like punishment. Francis had given me everything I'd claimed to want, and it turned out I'd never actually wanted any of it. I just wanted to hurt him, to prove I had power over him, to make him pay for loving me more than I'd been willing to love him back. Now he was happy with someone who actually deserved him, and I was alone with the consequences of my own choices. The worst part? I still couldn't bring myself to fully admit I'd been wrong. Even facing the wreckage of my own making, part of me wanted to blame Francis for giving up too easily, for not fighting harder for our marriage, for finding someone new so quickly. But deep down, in the part of myself I tried not to examine too closely, I knew the truth. I destroyed something good because I was too broken to recognize its value. And now I had to live with that knowledge for the rest of my life. Francis had won. He'd found happiness, respect, and love with someone who appreciated what he had to offer. And I had exactly what I demanded. Nothing.